Between the 1400s and the 1700s, close to 100,000 people were put on trial for witchcraft across Europe. Around 60,000 of them were killed, and 80% were women. But the trials were just the beginning. What happened to those women inside prison? Walls before they died was worse than anything you have ever heard. These are 25 torture methods used on women in prisons that have never been covered before. Let's start with number 25, the coffin cage. In medieval Europe, a woman convicted of blasphemy was locked inside a human-shaped iron cage called a gibbet. The cage was custom-built to fit her exact body so tight that the metal pressed into her skin from every angle. Then the cage was hoisted 15 to 20 feet in the air on a wooden pole in the middle of town. She could not sit down, could not move her arms, could not protect herself from rain, freezing wind, or the burning sun. Crowds threw rocks and rotten food at her. Birds pecked at her skin through the gaps in the iron. Death came from dehydration, starvation, or exposure. And it took anywhere from 3 days to over 2 weeks. In England, 16 gibbet cages still survive in museums today. One of them still has the skull of the prisoner locked inside it. After the woman died, her body was left in the cage for months, sometimes years, as a warning to every other woman in town. That is just number 25. And it only gets worse from here. Here comes number 24. The Spanish donkey. This device was built specifically for women. It was a sharp triangular wooden wedge mounted on legs about 6 to 7 ft high with the blade-like edge pointing straight up. The woman was stripped. Her hands were tied behind her back and she was forced to straddle the sharp ridge. Her entire body weight pressed down between her legs. Then weights were tied to her ankles to push her down harder. Some versions had metal spikes along the top edge. The Jesuits brought this device to Canada in 1646. Records from that year show one man was ruptured after just hours on it. Women who survived were left permanently unable to have children. The Spanish donkey was used from the 1100s all the way through the American Civil War in the 1860s. George Washington himself approved its use against a soldier in 1775, though only for 15 minutes. For women during the Inquisition, the sessions lasted days. Let's move to number 23, the saw torture. Women accused of witchcraft or adultery were hung upside down with their legs apart. Because all the blood rushed to the head, the woman stayed fully conscious the entire time. Then 2 men placed a large saw between her legs and began cutting downward through her body. The process went on for hours. Some executioners stopped at the stomach on purpose to drag out the death even longer. The woman could feel every single cut because the blood pooling in her brain kept her awake far longer than normal. In the Würzburg witch trials alone, which ran from 1626 to 1631, around 900 people were executed. Many of the women went through this exact method before their deaths. Across all of Europe, nearly 100,000 people faced witchcraft trials. And in regions like Germany, the conviction rate was over 90%. Once a woman was accused, she was already dead. Here comes number 22, rat torture. A live rat was placed on a woman's bare stomach. A metal bucket was placed over the rat, trapping it against music, her skin. Then fire was lit on top of the bucket. As the metal heated up, the panicking rat did the only thing it could. It started chewing and digging straight down through the woman's body to escape. The rat tore through skin, muscle, and organs, while the woman was fully tied down and could not move. She felt every single second. Guards would sometimes let the woman hear the rat scratching inside the bucket for several minutes before lighting the fire, letting the fear build to a breaking point before the real torture even started. This method was used across medieval Europe and reappeared during political purges for centuries. Let's talk about number 21, the Judas cradle, a tall pyramid-shaped seat with a razor-sharp point at the top. The woman was stripped, lifted by ropes, and slowly lowered onto the point. Her own body weight pushed her down, and the sharp tip slowly went deeper and deeper. The torturers controlled the speed. Sometimes they lifted her up and dropped her back down to increase the damage. The Spanish Inquisition used this regularly. Internal injuries were almost always fatal, but death could take up to 3 days. The victim was kept awake through the entire process. In the German city of Ecot, 300 suspected witches were executed between 1617 and 1631, and over 90% of them were women. Here comes clear's throat number 20. The heretic's fork, a small metal device with two sharp prongs on each end. One end stabbed under the chin, the other stabbed into the chest. A leather strap held it, music, in place around the neck. If the woman lowered her head even a tiny bit, the prongs dug into her throat. If she tried to speak, they went deeper into her chin. She could not sleep, could not eat, could not close her mouth. The word abjuro was often engraved on the device, meaning I recant. The only way to make it stop was to confess to whatever they accused her of. Women wore this for days until the sleep deprivation alone drove them into hallucinations and madness. Research shows the human body begins to break down after just 72 hours without sleep. These women were kept awake for 5, 6, sometimes 7 days straight. By then, the confessions were meaningless. The women would have admitted to anything just to be allowed to close their eyes. Let's move to number 19, the knee splitter. 2 blocks of wood studded with sharp metal spikes placed on either side of a woman's knee. A crank squeezed the blocks together. The spikes punched through skin on both sides at the same time. The kneecap shattered, tendons snapped, ligaments tore apart. The woman would never walk again for the rest of her life. This was used during the Inquisition to permanently accused heretics. Even women who survived the trial and were found innocent carried the damage forever. There was no surgery, no medicine, and no recovery. Just a lifetime of pain from that single session. Next one is number 18, the scavenger's daughter. Invented by Sir Leonard Skington during the reign of King Henry VIII in England, this iron device did the opposite of the rack. Instead of pulling the body apart, it crushed everything inward. The woman's head was pushed down to her knees. Her arms were crushed against her sides. Iron hoops and screws were tightened around her entire body until blood was forced out of her nose, ears, and fingertips. The pressure on the rib cage made breathing nearly impossible. Ribs cracked under the force. Some women passed out within minutes. Others were held in it for hours. Henry VIII ordered the execution of around 57,000 people during his 36-year reign. And devices like this were standard equipment in his prison system. And that is where this list shifts from brutal to absolutely inhuman. Here comes number 17, the Spanish tickler. A metal claw with 3 or 4 sharp prongs on a long handle. The torturer dragged it across a woman's bare body, shredding the skin in long strips. The claws dug deep enough to tear through muscle and expose bone underneath. Every wound became infected in the medieval world where antibiotics did not exist. Infection meant a slow death over 7 to 14 days. The Spanish tickler was one of the most common tools found in medieval dungeon inventories across Europe music, and was a standard instrument of the Inquisition. Let's move to number 16, the iron chair. A chair covered with 500 to 2,500 metal spikes. The woman was strapped in with leather restraints. Every part of her body that touched the chair was punctured. The back, the arms, the seat, the legs, the feet. In some versions, hot coals were placed under the chair to heat the spikes. The woman could feel the metal warming inside her flesh. The iron chair rarely killed fast. It was designed to keep the victim alive and in maximum agony for hours or even days while interrogators asked their questions. Death came from blood loss, infection, or shock. Next one is number 15, the choke pear. A metal device shaped like a pear inserted into a woman's mouth. When the torturer turned a screw at the top, the pear expanded, forcing the jaws apart until they dislocated or broke. Some versions had sharp blades that extended as it opened, cutting into the roof of the mouth and throat. Women accused of lying, witchcraft, or forbidden relationships were subjected to this. The internal damage was often fatal. Survivors were left permanently disfigured and unable to eat solid food again. Let's move to 14. Insect torture. Women were smeared with honey and tied down in the open sun near anthills or beehives. Insects swarmed her body for hours, biting and stinging every exposed inch of skin. In the ancient Greek variation called scaphism, the victim was placed inside a hollowed-out log with only her head and limbs showing. Insects bred inside the log, feeding on waste and slowly eating the flesh from outside. In historical records say victims survived for over a week inside the logs fully conscious while insects consumed their bodies one layer at a time. If you have made it this far, you need to subscribe right now. We cover the stories from history that nobody else will touch. And what comes next on this list is even darker. Next one is here comes number 13, the breast ripper. An iron tool with 4 heated claws used from the 1300s to the 1700s. It was designed exclusively for women. The device was heated until it glowed red, pressed against the body, and ripped away. Women accused of adultery, pregnancy, outside, marriage, or what the church called erotic white magic, were the primary targets. A wall-mounted version called the iron spider was also used where the woman was pulled away, and her own body weight did the tearing. Records from ancient Rome show that Saint Agatha of Sicily suffered this exact torture before her execution. The damage was immediate and usually fatal within hours. Let's Clear's throat talk about number 12, the Chinese Yu punishment in Imperial China. A punishment called Yu involved amputating both feet as a sentence for over 500 different crimes, including stealing and cheating. A 3,000-year-old female skeleton was found with both feet surgically removed, but the rest of her body in good health, confirming this practice was real and routinely performed. The woman survived the amputation, but was left permanently unable to walk for the rest of her life. This punishment was considered so normal that records from the period barely mention it. Next one is number 11, Renoi. In ancient Egypt and the Byzantine Empire, women convicted of adultery had their noses sliced off their faces with a blade. Music. This punishment was called Renoi. The wound left a permanent, visible mark that told everyone exactly what the woman had been accused of. She carried that disfigurement for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, men convicted of the same crime might receive a small fine or a beating. This practice music continued across the Mediterranean world for centuries and appeared in multiple cultures' music independently. The double standard was built directly into the law, and this practice was not rare. It was standard punishment in multiple empires spanning over 1,000 years of recorded history. Here comes Clear's throat number 10, the brazen bull. Invented in ancient Greece, music by a man named Perillus of Athens. This was a hollow, bronze statue shaped like a bull. The woman was locked inside through a door in the side. Then a fire was lit underneath. The metal heated up, and the woman was slowly roasted alive. Pipes inside the bull were designed so that the screams came out sounding like a bull's roar, turning human agony into entertainment for the crowd. Music standing outside. In a twist of justice, the tyrant Ferris tested the device on Pylos himself, first before music using it on actual prisoners. Next one is number 9, the tongue terror, a metal tool shaped like oversized scissors with rough serrated edges. The woman's mouth was forced open, music, and the tool grabbed her tongue. Then the tongue was ripped out. This was used on women accused of lying, speaking against the church, or testifying against men in authority. Without her tongue, a survivor could never tell her story, could never testify against her torturers, and could never speak again. Her pain disappeared from music history the moment her tongue was removed, and that was exactly the point of the entire exercise. Here comes number 8, the spiked barrel roll, a large wooden barrel lined on the inside with iron nails. The woman was forced inside and the barrel was sealed shut. Then the barrel was rolled down a hill or across cobblestone streets. Every rotation drove the nails deeper into her body from every direction at once. The puncture wounds covered every inch of skin. Death came from massive blood, music loss, and internal bleeding. This method was used sporadically across medieval Germany and Eastern Europe, and was reserved for crimes considered particularly offensive, music to the church or the crown. Here comes number 7, starvation in display cages. Women were locked in hanging iron cages in public squares, music, and denied all food and water. The cage was too small to sit or lie down in. She could only stand, hunched over music, as the days passed. Guards made sure nobody gave her anything. Death took music between 7 and 14 days. The public watched the entire music process unfold in front of them. Children walked past on their way to school. Merchants set up shops nearby. The dying woman became part of the scenery, and nobody did music a single thing to help her. In Scotland alone, 3,837 music people were accused of witchcraft under the Witchcraft Act. 3 of them were executed and 84% were women. Many of those women spent their final days in exactly these kinds of cages. Let's move to number 6. The lead sprinkler, a metal container shaped like a small ball on a handle filled with boiling water, molten lead, or burning oil. The torturer, music, sprinkled the liquid onto a woman's body through small holes in the container. Each drop burned through skin on contact. The torturer could target specific areas, music, with precision, dripping the liquid onto eyes, ears, or wherever he wanted. The control this tool gave the torturer made it, music, one of the most feared instruments in any medieval dungeon. Next one is number 5, crocodile shears. A metal tool shaped like pliers with the insides lined with sharp teeth. Music, resembling a crocodile's jaw. The shears were heated until they glowed red and then clamped onto fingers, toes, or other extremities. The heated teeth burned and crushed at the same time. One squeeze, music, removed an entire finger. This was primarily used on people who tried to kill royalty, but women, music, accused of treason or poisoning were also subjected to it. Court records from multiple European kingdoms document music its use between the 1300s and the 1600s. Let's move Clear's throat to number 4, flaying alive. The skin was slowly peeled from a woman's body while she was still alive and fully conscious. Starting at the hands or feet, music, the torturer used a sharp blade to separate skin from muscle, working inward toward the torso. The process could take 4 to 6 hours. In some cultures, the removed skin was nailed to a wall or stretched over a frame as a public warning. Fleeing was practiced in ancient music Assyria, medieval Europe, and parts of China. Skilled torturers applied salt, music, to the exposed tissue to prevent the body from going into shock, keeping the victim awake and feeling everything for as long as humanly possible. Clear's throat. Next one is number 3, the pendulum blade. A sharp, heavy blade suspended from the ceiling on a rope, swinging back and forth like a pendulum. The woman was strapped to a table directly underneath it. With each swing, the blade was lowered slightly, cutting deeper into her body. The process was agonizingly slow. She could see the blade coming closer with every single pass. The psychological torture of watching her own death approach inch by inch, music, was as devastating as the physical cutting itself. This method was documented in Spanish Inquisition records. In Spain alone, the Inquisition lasted from 1478 to 1834, a total of 356 years of torture built into the legal system. In France, approximately 2,000 music witch trials took place between 1550 and 1700. The church used torture as the standard method for extracting confessions, and devices like the pendulum blade were considered routine. Here comes number 2, immurement. A woman was sealed alive inside a wall, a pillar, or a music small stone chamber. Bricklayers built the wall around her while she stood inside, music leaving 0 openings for air, food, or water. In some cases, a tiny hole was left so food could be passed through, music keeping the woman alive in total darkness for weeks or months. The psychological destruction of being entombed alive while fully conscious broke every single victim, completely. This was documented across medieval Europe and parts of Asia. Skeletons have been found inside the walls of medieval music buildings, with scratch marks still visible in the stone, confirming the victims clawed at the walls trying to escape music until they died. And the last is number 1, the pear of anguish. This is the single most horrific torture device ever created, music for women. A metal instrument shaped like a pear made of 4 iron leaves connected music by a screw at the top. It was inserted into a woman's body. Then the screw was turned. Slowly, the 4 leaves spread apart inside her, tearing everything in their path. The damage was catastrophic and fatal in almost every case. Women bled to death or died from infection within days. 0 medicine was given. 0 mercy was shown. This device was used on women accused music of witchcraft, or what the Inquisition called union with the devil. Nearly 100,000 music people were tried for witchcraft across Europe. Up to 60,000 were killed. 80% music were women, and for many of those women, the pair of anguish was the last thing they ever experienced on this music earth. Human beings designed this tool. They built it with their own hands, tested it, music improved it, and used it on women whose only crime was being accused by someone who wanted them gone. The fact that this device existed for centuries, music, while entire civilizations looked the other way, should disturb every single person watching this video right now. History will never forget the music women who suffered in silence behind prison walls. If this shook you, drop a comment, subscribe, and watch the video on screen right